Good afternoon. Happy Saturday, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that everybody is doing as well as they can after the devastation that we're seeing from Hurricane Helene, both in Florida and well inland here across the Southeast and the parts of the lower Midwest as well. I continue to pray for those that are affected by the storm. A little prayer never hurt, in my opinion. So that's where we are right now. We are in cleanup mode. However, we are not finished with tropical season. And we continue to see signals for another storm to form in a very similar location to Helene here as we get to next week. Obviously, the news nobody wants to hear at this point, but it's really difficult to ignore this signal as we are likely going to see another storm in the Gulf here for the second half of next week. This one may not behave exactly like Helene. I've seen people post about copycat storms. We don't know that yet. What we do know is that the signal is going to improve for something to form here in the Western Caribbean in the next few days, probably towards Tuesday or Wednesday. And eventually that's going to get drawn northward into the southern Gulf later next week. After that, a lot more uncertainty, but I've circled an area in red that I think could be impacted directly by this system. At least a tropical storm and very quite possibly a hurricane. Again, as the waters in the Gulf, while they have cooled a little bit from Helene, still remain above average. And when I look at what happens in the Western Pacific with above average temperatures, we've had multiple storms hit China, kind of clustered in the same area. That gives me a little more confidence that we can have clusters of storms in the same areas as well in the Gulf and in portions of the Atlantic Ocean. So I've gotten some questions about this. Well, this system's not even showing up on the map. And that is true. This is the National Hurricane Center's page, and it says two-day graphical tropical weather outlook. So this system is not going to form in the next 48 hours through Monday afternoon. If you click on the 7-day, you will see that our chance has grown to 40%, a medium chance of development. I personally think this number is going to continue to climb as models continue to see what's going on here with the Central American gyre, with moisture coming in from a tropical wave and favorable warm waters, again, in the Western Caribbean. This doesn't necessarily tell us where the path of the storm is going to be. What it shows is where the chance for formation may be. So it could be anywhere in the Southwest Caribbean, to the east of Nicaragua, to the northeast of Costa Rica, north of Panama. It could develop near the coastline of Honduras and Nicaragua. It could develop as far east as the Cayman Islands, or it could wait a little longer and form near Belize and the Yucatan, as well as western Cuba. And some models are a little later on development and don't develop it until it gets into the south central Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, if it forms down in here, that's going to happen sooner and will give it a better chance to develop into a stronger system. If it takes longer here, we don't want to rule out a hurricane, but the odds are going to be a little bit lower due to the fact that it's going to take longer to consolidate. So that's what we're looking at. We do have Hurricane Isaac, almost a major hurricane, way up here in the northern Atlantic. That run may come to an end as poor Isaac moves into some cooler water and accelerates northeastward. Tropical Storm Joyce, beginning to feel wind shear. That will turn away, not be a threat, and wind shear should kill off that central circulation and turn it into a remnant low towards the beginning of next week. There's another area that is going to follow Joyce that has a 60% chance of developing into our next tropical depression or storm. The next two names on the list that I think we're going to get here in the next week are Kirk and Leslie. It's tough to say if this area will be Kirk or this one will be. I know the Gulf storms have all been ladies, so Leslie would make sense, but it's possible that this becomes a depression first, but this one strengthens quicker and becomes Kirk. So we'll have a battle for that name. Again, that doesn't change our forecast. It just changes the record books. Here's a look from Zoom Earth at our satellite. You can see these storm systems, the remains of Helene post-tropical, stalled across parts of central Kentucky, just south of Evansville, Indiana. We'll continue to have wet, cool, windy weather here across the Ohio Valley. And fortunately, the heavy rain and severe weather threat has come to an end. So if you're under these clouds, enjoy the taste of fall. I know we don't want the rain anymore, but at least we're getting a break from the humidity. And we're seeing very nice weather across most of the northern Gulf region, all the way up into the southeast. So better news here in that we get a chance to dry out, albeit the Western Carolinas that really need to see that sun are going to stay fairly cloudy today. Obviously, we have a lot of flash flood warnings, river flood warnings, flash flood emergencies in areas where dams are breaking across much of the southern and central Appalachians, all the way down into central Georgia, into eastern North Carolina and South Carolina, and into the Florida Panhandle and Big Bend region. And down in South Florida, you probably want a little rain because we're under a heat advisory in southeastern Florida. heat as well across the interior of the Southwest, and we've got red flag conditions for gusty winds and fire danger over parts of the northern plains and the Rockies. Here's a water vapor image. This tells you how much moisture is in the middle and upper levels of the atmosphere. With this upper low, we still have quite a bit of moisture, but not as much as what we've seen over the last few days. And in fact, this graphic is old, so this is actually turned away to the north and west. That's right, our GOES images are not updating. So just pretend you didn't see that. All right, I'm going to laugh at myself. I need to right now. Good night. But anyway, getting to the future track of the remains of Helene, stalled across Tennessee and Kentucky through the weekend, then eventually a little bit of that gets accelerated off to the east. Most of the rain will be on the northern side, so we're actually going to see some cooler, wet weather over the Ohio Valley into parts of the mid-Atlantic, maybe even the Northeast here over the next few days, but nothing super heavy at this point. Here is where our upper low is spinning. You kind of see there's a little bit of a dry zone in there around Clarksville and Hopkinsville, and then we have rain on both sides of the upper low. Very wet across southwest Indiana, southern Illinois, showery across middle Tennessee, and then we see some rain advancing into places that still need some, even though it was nasty yesterday. Lexington, Kentucky, Cincinnati, Dayton. West Virginia is drying out today. We see that band of light rain moving up to the I-70 corridor from Richmond, Indiana through Columbus and all the way towards Pittsburgh and Morgantown. So a little damp for those college football games. But you know what? We got bigger problems to talk about. Here are the folks that still do not have electricity. Over 3.5 million customers in the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic states and Midwest without power. And a lot of them are in Florida. If I zoom in on the Southeast, you will see that. But even more are in South Carolina. Believe it or not, this area of Florida got hit hard is not as populated as some of the residents off to the north. It's going to be weeks before we can get power here because the toll of the damage of the eye wall of Helene created. But if you go up into Georgia, we have a lot of folks without power still across southern Georgia, Valdosta, Dublin, Statesboro, all the way up to Augusta, hit really hard here by the eye wall of Helene as it moved onshore 2 nights ago. Even northeast Georgia still has a lot of power losses. In South Carolina, we see a lot of that across the western half of the state, in particular the upstate and the western Midlands, but some power outages all the way down to the coast as well. Myrtle Beach is in pretty good shape overall at this point. North Carolina, obviously the places that are flooded are going to still have no power probably for a few weeks here as a major flood continues. Places like Asheville and Brevard and up towards Boone, a lot of these folks still no power at this point. Even the Charlotte area, we still have quite a few folks without power at this time due to some of that flooding in the area. We're in better shape in eastern North Carolina. A nice day here. We actually had an EF3 tornado touchdown in Rocky Mount yesterday afternoon, shortly after I did my video. So I had mentioned there was a risk for at least a strong tornado, probably not a lot of them. That was our strong tornado in Rocky Mount, which unfortunately has been hit by several tornadoes here over the last couple of years. River flooding is another big deal here, and ocean flooding still. We still have flooding from the Gulf and Crystal River here with all that onshore water piling onshore here, the Nature Coast. So we still have some flooding there, albeit the surge has come down quite a bit and folks can get in to start cleaning up here in the next week. We do have river flooding here in parts of the Big Bend region, the Ocklawahnee River, Sopchoppy River here, quite a bit of flooding in central Georgia and more flooding in the Atlanta area. But our biggest problems are in the Carolinas and East Tennessee at this point. We have significant flooding along the Saluda River, along the Congaree River, along the some of the tributaries here of the Savannah River. Quite a bit of flooding here along the Catawba that runs just west of Charlotte up to Hickory or Hickory down to Charlotte. And then very major flooding on the French Broad River and some of the creeks and streams here, the Watauga River as well, and up to the New River around Radford just south of Blacksburg. And even a little bit of flooding going on over the Shenandoah River as well. But as you can see here, a lot of dams have burst. Incredible flooding here, even around Newport, Tennessee. I've seen some incredible destruction. And also the Nolichucky River as well here in East Tennessee. And the reason why, we weren't just dealing with Helene, albeit that was the biggest impetus for this rain, but we were dealing with several days of rain out ahead of Helene. And a lot of the moisture that came straight out of the Gulf was hitting areas from the south, allowing that air to rise, condense faster, and produce much heavier rain rates over the mountains. You can see when you get to places like Caesar's Head and YMCA of Greenville Camp and Slater, Marietta, some of these spots picked up 3 to 4 feet of rain in 4 days. Brevard picked up a foot. Here's the problem. All that rain that falls in these mountainous areas has to go down the mountain. And because it does so, all the water that runs from the mountain down into lower elevations piles up and piles up. And that's why we've seen so many folks that have been crushed by these floodwaters. And the waters are going to continue to rise first before they can drop down. We still have all that water to come down. Gravity is going to take its toll here. So very localized, but very extreme. This is a record-breaking storm for North Carolina and South Carolina. We are probably going to have our biggest natural disaster in North Carolina's history, even worse than Florence back in 2018 and Matthew in 2016. Just a lot of folks inundated. Here's the rain map that shows that this is from weatherbell.com. This is from the historic data from official sites, 20 inches showing, but there were spots that picked up twice that. A lot of rain in Atlanta. We had a 2-day record, close to a foot of rain in greater Atlanta, 7 inches in Tallahassee, 9 to 10 around Apalachicola, 5 or 6 in Panama City, and then getting better as you get farther to the west. And heavy rain as well around portions of the lower Ohio River Valley, Missouri, and Mississippi rivers where they all meet here. I heard from some of you that the rain totals were too low in the forecast, and some places got 5 or 6 inches of rain. And we even saw that across parts of Western Virginia, some crazy flooding here. So the good news is that the worst is behind us. The bad news is that we're not fully finished yet with the rain. We're going to still see around an inch or so of that over northern and central Kentucky, over parts of southern and central Ohio and Indiana, some lighter amounts farther to the west. We are going to see more rain over parts of central Florida, albeit I don't think will cause major flooding, but we've got a boundary that's stuck here off the southeast coast and draped across central Florida. And that will serve as some convergence for more heavy amounts of rain here. Fortunately, not for the Big Bend where we're doing a lot of cleanup, but farther south of you, when we get down to the peninsula, especially the west coast, we are going to see amounts of heavy rain. All right, so let's take a look at the future evolution of our upper level systems. And this is the upper low here that pulled Helene quickly northward here on Friday. It is stuck, but will slowly drift east and weaken. There will be a new area of high pressure that builds back into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's going to keep our front stalled here near the northern Gulf Coast. Stalled fronts over warm water are never a good thing. The reason why is we've got this weakening trough. We've got a bigger ridge of high pressure building over Canada where we're having extended summer here. And we've got a ridge that extends from the Pacific into central and eastern Canada. Over time, we are going to see this upper low lift out and a big area of high pressure build in. That heat buildup will allow lower heights and moisture to spin in the Western Caribbean. And we're expecting a storm to form somewhere down in here. And then the question mark is going to be, there's really 3 or 4 factors here. Number 1, how quickly does this storm form? Number 2, where does the ridge of high pressure end up? It could be farther east or west. That's going to make a huge difference in where the system ends up going. Number 3, do we have a front that comes down? You see all this much cooler air pushing into the northwest. That's going to drive down south and east. And there are some timing differences on it. But do we have a front here that interacts with this system? Do we have more wind shear that tries to kill it? Or does that front get hung up and we have a system here that's going to be stuck around for a long time? Eventually, we see this ridge lifting north and east and we see a big trough dropping down, but this could certainly change on the timing. So I just can't tell you with confidence yet where this is going to strike. My gut says central and eastern Gulf at this point, but again, a lot can still change here. If you go back and look at the European model, which does not develop this system as quickly, and let me take us back to the 0Z run, you're going to see some differences here. You see the ridge of high pressure, but what we see here is a trough that is slower to drop down, and the ridge continues to build, setting up a weaker steering environment for something in the Gulf. Remember, the GFS had this strong trough down here picking up our storm, just like the last one did. The European is not as strong with that trough. It just moves it through very quickly here, just a quick mover and heating right back up. And that's going to make a big difference here in the longer term. Sorry for that. So let's take a look here at what's going on across the rest of the tropics. This is Hurricane Isaac, Category 2 storm. Winds are 105 miles per hour. It's not far from Category 3. Pretty nice, tight little eye. It's not a big system, not affecting anybody, harming very little out there, but is holding its own. It is expected to weaken over time, though, and will be a remnant post-tropical cyclone by the beginning of next week. This is Tropical Storm Joyce. You can see wind shear is beginning to fight the system. It's holding its own for now, but will weaken over time. Winds are 50 miles per hour. The storm's moving northwest and will recurve and will be a remnant low by the beginning of next week. So again, we're now looking down towards the Caribbean, and here's why. This is what's called the Madden-Julian Oscillation. If you don't understand this, that's okay. I'm going to give you a real quick rundown here. The Madden-Julian oscillation back at the beginning parts of September, end of August, when things were quiet, was on the other side of the country, meaning our rising air that created storms was over, not the country, I'm sorry, the world. The rising air creating all the storms was back across the Western Pacific. That has come around now into favorable locations for development in the Gulf and Caribbean, phases 7, and now we're in phase 8. We stay in a favorable phase into the beginning of October and potentially even into the middle of October, where all the rising motion is going to be across Central America and the Western Atlantic. This is going to allow our storms to form and create divergence aloft and allow them to grow. So as a result, the European model is showing a 70% above average chance of tropical activity here next week. And the following week, almost 3 times the average for the second full week of October, showing 290% of the mean, meaning we're going to have a lot of storms here for the second week of October, if this is correct. And 20% or 200% of the average, so twice the average here in the Atlantic Basin the following week, the third week of October, I guess third week of October. And then we may settle down here at the end of October, but still near the average, which is coming down at that point. So we are in for a very busy stretch of weather over the next 3 weeks or so in the tropics. You can see lots of rain across the Gulf here next week and even into the following week, staying wet across the southeast. That's the last thing you probably want to hear today, but that is unfortunately what we're dealing with here. The front does not leave the scene of the crime, and the tropics stay quite busy here. Here's a look at the possibilities for development. And you can see the European ensembles here show us by the beginning of next week, there's a 70 or 80% chance of a tropical depression forming on Monday. This timeline is actually sped up some from where we were yesterday. So that medium chance may end up being a high chance tomorrow or Monday morning. Don't be surprised if you see that. You can see the chances continue to grow here as we get to Wednesday and Thursday, and a high chance we have something, and then we start to take a look at where it ends up going. This is next Sunday, so 8 days from today, and we start to see ensembles pulling things northward, but some still stuck back here to the west. So I'm going to show you those ensembles. We'll start with the GFS ensembles, and let me stop this. You can see there are several solutions showing a system down here, and there's some that are also showing something here. So there may be 2 separate systems, but the one we're most concerned with is this one, because the one that's going to be down here is probably not going to be an issue for the northern Gulf. But you can see here, several ensembles here, almost a third of them showing development and then a track towards either the Yucatan or the southeastern Gulf, including Cuba. As a result, we have many, many solutions here now showing at least a tropical storm by Friday here across the central and northern or even northeastern Gulf of Mexico. This system out here is what the European is trying to develop, but the GFS and Canadian are developing the eastern system, which is the one that follows Helene, unfortunately. So you can see here several solutions pulling something up anywhere from Louisiana to Florida at this point. It's a big spread, but you can see that we're kind of looking like what we did with Helene about 6 or 7 days before it formed. And that is not what you want to hear, unfortunately, but I've got to tell you about it. This is just something we cannot ignore anymore at this point. Looking at the European ensembles, you'll see a little bit of a different feel here. 1 weak system moving into the southwest Gulf, the other one even weaker, coming up into the central Gulf around the Yucatan. And as a result, we don't have as many stronger solutions heading towards Florida, but we do have some. There's a couple in here, a couple of outliers that have hurricane intensity turning away towards the northeast. But we have quite a few stuck down in here. What's going to happen is, like I said a few minutes ago in this video, there's going to be a front that comes down, but a ridge that builds in from the west, and the steering turns weaker. So that front's going to linger, and we're going to have some interesting interaction from the tropics here. Interesting meaning slow-moving systems potentially, lots of rain potentially, lots of uncertainty. So this is definitely not something that I can accurately predict for you guys. I know you're watching videos out there on YouTube potentially that are talking about it like it's a copycat storm. I'll just caution you at this point. There's a lot of things that can still happen here. And until the system does begin to form here, probably by Monday night or Tuesday, it looks like, the models are going to adjust quite a bit and we'll start to finally hone in on something. The problem with that is, as you all know from Helene, we may be within 3 days of a landfall by the time that actually happens. So again, Canadian ensemble shows one strong solution going into South Florida, but the majority of our runs weaker and going into the central and eventually northeastern Gulf by the beginning of the following week. And more development out here, by the way. So let's look at the operational models real quick. The GFS has started to become consistent, which is of concern. But take a look at this. It already has a tropical depression by Monday night in the Southwest Caribbean over some very warm water. and then a quickly strengthening system. It could be even a hurricane by Wednesday night in the Northwest Caribbean. This would be developing in the same exact spot as Helene, but maybe even a little bit stronger. You can see it does have that weaker low here as well. It also has a low that could develop on the Pacific side of Mexico. So two systems here that compete, but then potentially this system taking over. So you can see here, it deepens the system south of Louisiana next weekend. This is a week from today, so we're no longer in fantasy land on the models. We're now in let's keep an eye on it mode. And then eventually turns it northeast, which would be a bad solution for anyone from Louisiana to North Florida here, unfortunately. This is particularly showing that landfall on Sunday afternoon, so 8 days from now. If you look at the run before, it was actually pretty consistent with this one, a little weaker, but same kind of location. And if you look at the run before that, it was stronger. So the 0Z and 12Z, very similar, and the 6Z weaker, but kind of in the same location. So the GFS is latching on to something that we definitely need to watch. The Canadian is also latching on to something. It's not as strong, but it does have a tropical storm here in the Northwest Caribbean by Thursday. And it does have potentially a hurricane in the Northeast Gulf by next Saturday morning. But then it too shows a stronger front than the GFS, pushing this farther south and keeping it from a quick landfall. This will be something in Florida's hair for a while here, right into the end of next weekend and eventually moving away. And by the way, there'll be something else out here. So they both agree there's going to be something in the central to northeast Gulf. The Icon model is not there yet. It does have development, but it's weaker and farther to the southwest. But it too will eventually try to get picked up and move to the north and east. You'll see, though, this strong high pushes down, the wind shear picks up, and as a result, the Icon is not yet developing this system. It's shown hints that it might, but it's not getting to that point. And the European, which has been the worst model this tropical season of the global models, does in fact not develop anything until we have something in the Gulf next weekend, and by then it's a lot weaker. Same challenge as the Icon, with the front moving down into Louisiana, into the eastern Gulf region, and keeping this system very sheared so it doesn't develop. So we have two things going on here. We have a storm that could form and overtake the upper level pattern, which is what the GFS and the Canadian are showing, and they were both right with Helene. Or we've got a system that fails to form until it gets into hostile environment here later towards the end of the week and the weekend and sits around in the central Gulf and just dumps rain but doesn't really develop into anything. That's what we're kind of rooting for, but we're not rooting for that rain, that's for sure. Here's the European AI, and it has a system as well, pulling it close to the Tampa Bay region Sunday night and Monday. So you can see here, if something does form and it beats the front, it's going into the eastern Gulf. But if it doesn't form, it's stuck down here, and we just have a lot of rain in Florida. So that's what we're looking at. Finally, in the Pacific, returning to a very wet pattern here with development possible south of Acapulco, which is obviously a concern this time of the year. And we may see more down here south of El Salvador. We have something that's going to pass by south of Hawaii that I'm not really worried about. And then we do have things of concern here in the Western Pacific. This is Jebi, I believe, which is predicted to be a typhoon. It should skip just to the right of Japan, but it could be close here by the beginning of next week. The storm that's of greater concern, though, is rapidly intensifying. This is Julian, also, I think, Krathon, but it's going to release the Krathon for sure here, northeast of the Philippines, and it will be a threat to Taiwan. Right now, Taiwan is in the path, albeit the forecast recurves it just off the coast. Also, Okinawa in the path, and eventually something we need to keep a closer eye on. So let's catch our breath and just take it one day at a time right now. Yes, models are showing a threat, but they're not all fully on board. The models that have done the best so far over this stretch of the tropical season are the ones that are a little more alarming. But again, we've got some time for now. Let's just continue to monitor. I'm going to have daily videos for you all until I do see a threat. It's very possible we have a tropical storm, though, by next Tuesday in the Western Caribbean. It's also possible that system doesn't develop as quickly as the models show, which would be what we're rooting for. So I appreciate you all for trusting me with your forecasting needs. I am continuing to pray for those here in the affected areas from Helene. We are going to have some better weather coming up, but I know it's going to be a very long and slow process to clean up. As always, I want to give all the honor and all the glory to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Despite all of this craziness, I truly serve a wonderful God, and I can tell my problems how big my God is. And we're all here licking our wounds. We're lamenting. There's a lot going on even beyond hurricane season. But The psalmist tells us in Psalm 102, 25 to 27, that in the beginning you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like clothing. You will change them, and they will be discarded. But you remain the same, Lord, and your years will never end. And that is the hope that we all have as believers, is that eternally we will be with God one day, but we're going to have to suffer in the meantime, and we're going to have to lament, and we're going to have to cry out to the Lord and ask for his intervention and salvation as our hope. I am happy to pray for you no matter what your prayer needs are. And if you're not a believer and you don't believe that, you're still welcome here. I still love you just as much as the believer. And so does the Lord. And so does Jesus Christ. So I wanted to share that wonderful news with you all today. And we will keep very closely watching this system. We'll have another video tomorrow afternoon for you. Have a great weekend. See ya.